There is this under-celebrated documentary about the early 90s Norwegian black metal scene called Until the Light Takes Us that I think everyone should watch. The doc goes over the scene's history, which was a gnarly one, replete with right-wing politics, murders, extreme music, suicide, and gets these super in-depth interviews with individuals at the center of all this drama. But it also outlines how black metal, really just the most extreme genre of its time, became forever altered once it entered the world of corporate music labels, mainstream media, and globalization. And the reason I'm talking about it right now is that the doc provides the perfect example of Jean Baudrillard's concepts of simulacra and hyperreality. Baudrillard argued in the 80s, we were living under conditions where what was presented as reality was not actually representing a real. In fact, mass media, consumerism, and technology had irrevocably destroyed the real and replaced it altogether.
Welcome to the desert of the real.
What we were left with was a collection of simulacra, representations of realities that don't exist, that together form hyperreality, a reality generated by models of a real without origin or reality. Stay with me because this is where the black metal part is very helpful. In the early 90s, members of the budding Norwegian black metal scene formed a secret club called the Black Circle, which is dumb as but they did some crazy up shit, including a host of church burnings. And while they hated Christianity, they weren't Satanists. They were neo-paganists who believed in Thor and all that, fascists who hated globalization, but they weren't Satanists. Now, inevitably, the leader, Varg Vikernes of the band Burzum, gets caught burning churches, and when he does, the multinational heavy metal magazine Kerrang does an article about the whole situation. Despite interviewing Varg and other members of the scene, the article calls them Satanists, devil worshippers, satanic terrorists. In the early 90s, that was a time of satanic panic when in the US and all across Europe, news outlets were reporting on satanic cults and crimes that almost never actually got back to Satanism. You get this group of church burners who play scary music, and naturally Kerrang puts them in the Satanist box. And here's where we get to simulacra. That documentary shows how after the Kerrang article comes out, there are several copycat church burnings. And at the scenes of these crimes, the perpetrators spray painted 3 6s, upside down crosses, pentagrams, images of Satanism. So what is it that these church burnings were copycats of? Not Varg. He wasn't a Satanist. They were copying a representation of something that doesn't exist. Hyperreality is very much so the condition we live under. Have you ever bought a burger from Jack in the Box because the advertisement made it look good? Then when you got it, it looked like how burgers from Jack in the Box look? And that's what's so nefarious about hyperreality, is we kinda have a sense that things aren't exactly being represented accurately, but you don't know what accurate is supposed to be. Like, you still went and bought that burger. Politicians make campaign promises and you vote for them knowing they won't fulfill them, but still hopeful that they'll follow through on something. AI images are flooding our timeline. Sometimes we have a sense that they're AI generated, sometimes you get tricked, and most scary, sometimes we see pictures and we think they're AI, but actually they're not. We're living in a reality where the real is becoming impossible to pin down. This is a consequence of mass production, and it's a historical process. Herbert Marcuse noted in 1964 that economic inequality was declining, poverty was declining, and working class power was increasing. However, what was odd was that Karl Marx had earlier argued that what kept workers from overthrowing the system was that they had no time or energy on account of long hours and paltry wages. In the era of abundance that Marcuse wrote about, a new explanation was needed. Marcuse noted that modern technology expanded the system's capabilities of control, and that mass transportation and communication, commodities like clothing and food, and quote, the irresistible output of the entertainment and information industry carry with them prescribed attitudes and habits, certain intellectual and emotional reactions which bind the consumers more or less pleasantly to the producers, and through the latter to the whole. However, as neoliberalism shifted conditions of workers again from abundance to precarity, our media society simply continued to develop to a point where, Baudrillard argued, it was no longer that the entertainment and information industry was conditioning how consumers perceived reality, rather, reality itself had been replaced. Baudrillard wrote, "We live in a world where there is more and more information and less meaning." Wolf Blitzer, who started at CNN in May 1990, noted later that he, quote, thought it was going to be a relatively quiet beat, seeing as the Cold War was winding down. However, Saddam Hussein's invasion of Kuwait offered the perfect spectacle for 24-hour coverage, accomplished for the first time in history with satellite technology. As one of the only outlets reporting out of Iraq, when US bombing began, CNN provided feeds of images of violence from afar, illustrated by Bernard Shaw's famous declaration, "The skies over Baghdad have been illuminated." Missing was what it meant that the skies were lit up, that the US air campaign was racking up scores of civilian casualties. It's clear how this collapse of meaning serves capital, and tracks that the rise of hyperreality corresponds to a rapid process of media concentration. In 1983, 50 firms dominated the greater part of every mass media. 7 years later, that number dropped to 23. And in 1996, Bill Clinton deregulated the FCC, drastically concentrating corporate media monopolies. By 2002, 9 transnational conglomerates came to own most media outlets. So it's not hard to see how neoliberalism and hyperreality lend themselves to right-wing movements. Oh shit, it went out. In 1987, Reagan did away with the Fairness Doctrine, which had forced radio news shows to contend with at least 2 political viewpoints. In the next year, the Rush Limbaugh show became nationally syndicated on AM and FM stations. Limbaugh going on to call women feminazis, Obama an affirmative action candidate, saying Jesse Jackson looked like all composite pictures of wanted criminals, and also being awarded the Medal of Freedom from Donald Trump. Limbaugh's success was reproduced widely on 24-hour cable news when in 1996, billionaire Rupert Murdoch founded Fox News and got psychos like Bill O'Reilly and Glenn Beck to host shows. This hyper-real media society cleared the way for the rise of Trump with his outrageous partisanship, his accusations of fake news, and his alternative facts. Just recently, on April 18th, Trump posted a picture on Truth Social, he truthed it, of himself holding up a picture of Kilmar Abrego Garcia's hand. Garcia, who was mistakenly deported to El Salvador and just recently was brought back to the US, has little pictures tattooed on his fingers, but in the picture Trump held up, above each tattoo was photoshopped M, then an S, then a 1, and then a 3. And Trump was very clear in the post. He wrote that the Democrats, quote, said he is not a member of MS-13, even though he's got MS-13 tattooed into his knuckles. And following, Trump gave this crazy interview to Terry Morin of the ABC News, where after Morin gave Trump the out and was like, well, some people are interpreting Garcia's tattoos to mean MS-13, Trump argued with Morin. No, he has MS as clear as you can be, not interpreted. Seemingly, Trump himself was bamboozled by hyperreality. Now, eventually, even Republicans like Lindsey Graham started saying, well, his tattoos represent MS-13 since the photo Trump held up was obviously photoshopped. And now, this is dumb, because if you've seen any picture from any news outlet from someone in MS-13, they have it written on them. It's all over. Huge MS-13. But even this false claim that Garcia's tattoos represent MS-13 doesn't seem to me to have a clear margin. It seems like it's a charitable interpretation of something Trump said that wasn't true, and all over Twitter, Trumpies are repeating the claim. Timothy Snyder identified the post-truth era as a reiteration of older totalitarian tendencies and not something new or postmodern. There has been a distinctly postmodern and hyperreal dimension to the Trump moment. During Trump's first term, one of his main propagandists was Tucker Carlson, who hosted an incredibly successful primetime Fox News show. In 2020, a U.S. district judge wrote in an opinion for a ruling in which she dismissed a slander lawsuit against Tucker Carlson. The quote, general tenor of the show should inform a viewer that Carlson is not stating actual facts about the topics he discusses and is instead engaging in exaggeration and non-literal commentary. However, I'm sure if you ask any boomer who kept up with Carlson, they'd tell you that they think Carlson gives straight business. But even what is covered on the news has shaken the foundation of our collective understanding of what the news is. On April 13th, 2017, right-wing crackpot Jeffrey Lord said on CNN that Trump was the, quote, Martin Luther King of healthcare. Later in the day, CNN had him back on to spend 2 full primetime segments discussing what he had said earlier that day on CNN. So CNN's news shows, instead of covering the news, spent 2 full primetime segments talking about what was said on the news. So the news was the news. But how could the news be the news? And what's crazy is clips of the original segment and the ones that followed were put out by CNN on social media, transmitting Jeffrey Lord's dumbass fucking take through several mediums that went at the root of it all. Totally lost by the time it got to YouTube was a boring policy disagreement surrounding the Affordable Care Act. And this brings us to the political role of social media under hyper-real conditions. Social media gives the feeling of activism, as individuals post and repost and get fed information on political topics or increasingly meta discussions about topics or ideologies. See Jubilees, one dickhead debates 20 dickheads. And people's feeds are often inundated with this sort of content in order to keep them engaged and scrolling. Adam Curtis in Hypernormalization, another documentary everyone needs to watch, identifies this development as key to understanding the rise of the far right. Not only is it that radical right-wing political ideologies festered on social media, the effective silencing of left-wing alternative political speech in right-wing spaces and vice versa rendered online political speech ineffective and the seriousness of the right-wing threat underestimated. Like, part of why people were so surprised Trump won was because during the entire election cycle, they had only been fed left-wing perspectives, so they thought most people are left-wing in this country. It seems to me these mediums we on the left produce content on are built to inhibit rather than aid the construction of political alternatives. But obviously, since I'm making these videos, I don't really know how to not think of YouTube as a resource. So comment below if you have an idea of like what an alternative could be. And what I'm about to say is funny considering the topic of the video, but you better still like, comment, and subscribe so that publishers will look twice in my book.